Hello everybody. So here's a question that's come up. Can you or I grade and inspect our own structural lumber that we create on our home mill? So this video is kind of a pickup from the last video we did where we talked about stamped wood. And man, there was a flood of comments, there was a flood of views too. I appreciate everybody watching, but a flood of comments, over 1,200 comments at the point of recording this video. And those comments were just all over the board. So before we get into answering that question, of course, I need to say the disclaimer. If you're going to try to build something structural, something that you're going to live in, a dwelling, or something that you're going to have other people stay in, by all means, check your state building codes and check your county level with the inspector codes, all those type of things. Check yours out. Have that conversation. Don't just take what I'm saying as the gospel truth, because it's going to be different no matter where you are. Along the same lines, some of you commented that, I think several of you in New York State said, well, there's actually a clause that if you build with lumber milled off your own property, you don't have to have it inspected. If that's the case, please verify that with a link below. Link to that code, and we'll come back and address that in a follow-up video, because those type of exceptions I want to be able to address. Of course, we want to be able to document them. And the same for any of you other individuals that made comments about, well, in my state, this is how it is, or this is how we can get around it when it comes to building with stamped lumber. So leave those links below so I can have tangible resources to read and to review. And then, of course, we'll do a follow-up discussing those things. So even though there's over 1,200 comments, there was one comment theme or idea that kind of dominated the thread. And that comment was based on the fact that if you have to have stamped, inspected lumber to build structural walls in a dwelling, why not just create your own stamp? So before we talk about the steps needed to qualify and to be certified to inspect your own structural grade lumber, let's address that comment about just making your own stamp and just getting around to all of the inspection process, because that needs to be addressed clearly. So since this is a video, it's best to obviously use visuals instead of me just looking at the camera doing this. So let's step into a make-believe scenario here. Let's say behind me, this stack of lumber is a gorgeous stack of dimensional lumber that I've milled from the copious amounts of Virginia pine that I have on my property here. And I've milled that lumber in 2x4s and 2x6s and 2x8s, nominal sizes of course. And I've got them all nice and stacked up. They've been air dried in the barn, and now they're here ready for a project. Maybe I'm going to build a summer cottage down here in the valley, so and I can retreat from the main house to the summer cottage if I choose to do so. So whether this stack of lumber is right here or I've already started building with it, and I've just created my own stamp to stamp on it, Red Tool House Inspected, or even made up a name, and just made a stamp and just stamped all that wood. So whether that's here in the pile or it's already framed up in a structure that I'm starting to build and the inspector shows up, and I'm going to say if the inspector shows up, that's a big if, I cannot put that in bigger cap letters. If the inspector shows up, and he does more than a drive-by inspection, which some of us are familiar with, he or she is going to look at that stack of lumber or look at that frame up and is going to look at that stamp and say, well, I don't recognize that. What the heck is that? Red Tool House Inspection? That doesn't mean squat. Why would they look that closely at it? Well, most likely, again, since I'm dealing with nominal lumber here, I don't have the equipment. Most of us don't have the equipment to surface 4 sides, do the rounded edges, to make a true dimension 2x4 like you'd get at the box stores, that 1.5 by 3.5 inch junk stuff. Sorry. So that's going to be the first red flag. Obviously, this isn't store-bought. I don't see this as standard lumber I'm used to handling, the inspector says. So they look at the stamp and say, well, that doesn't make any sense. That's nothing. What are you doing here, dummy? The inspector's going to look at me and kind of laugh and say, yeah, whatever, Troy, you're an idiot. For those of you keeping score at home, this actually isn't Virginia pine. This is a mixture of poplar and some beautiful red oak that we have here. Love it. Love the smell of it. I wish we had smell-o-vision on YouTube. So you may be saying, well, no, dummy, I wouldn't make up my own stamp. Anybody with half a brain would know not to do that. You want to actually duplicate the stamp that you would see in a box store or from a lumber supply. So, one of the 6 major inspection companies out there, that's the one you want to duplicate. And that's where I say, that's where I fall off the lumber stack. And that's where I say, ooh, that gets even more dangerous. and actually more ignorant. So if it happens to be raining when you're watching this video, or you're really bored and have nothing better to do, then Google trademark violation or trademark counterfeiting and see what you get. Because that's technically what you'd be doing here. If you took somebody's stamp, one of these inspector company stamps, and you duplicated that in the attempt to fool somebody or to get around a process, then you are counterfeiting a trademark. That is a really big issue, especially when you're dealing with a trademark of a company that deals in inspecting for safety measures. So if you watched my previous video, I quoted the vice president of Timber Products, Dave was great to talk to me. He's still talking. We're talking back and forth about things, really getting a lot of great information from him. And he said inspection companies like his and others have a 100% success rate in litigating counterfeit stamping processes. So if you think you can beat the odds, I don't think you can beat 100%. Obviously, if you don't get caught, you don't get caught. But if you get caught, it's going to hurt, and it's going to hurt real bad financially. Now go to one more extreme. If you're actually taking that wood and selling it, and you're propagating that for gain, then that could actually result in jail time. Because again, you're dealing with a safety measure here. So I highly, highly discourage trying to counterfeit or make up your own stamp. I know a lot of you guys are just tongue-in-cheek when you say, hey, just go to Office Depot and get your own stamp. Nobody's going to know. You may be able to get one past the inspector and it may be fine. But if you don't and you get caught, the cost of lumber at a box store is going to be the last thing you're going to worry about. Now, before you start hurling hateful comments about how these codes and these laws are draconian, or they were put in place so that politicians could line their pockets or big corporations could win out about everything, I get it. As a libertarian, yeah, they all rub me the wrong way. I don't like it. But on the flip side, you can see why a lot of these codes were put in place, intentionally at least. Yeah, the intention behind it was, of course, for safety. If me, being a nice West Virginian Appalachian redneck, decides to build a house out of sycamore that I've cobbled together off my mill and other things and scab stuff together, and I build this really nice looking house on the outside, and I sell it for some amount to some sucker who has absolutely no idea what's going on with it, and that house falls over on him 2 years later because it was made out of sycamore, then obviously that's a big issue. I'm liable. There's all kinds of people that are liable. So that was the intent of putting those in, of course. So comment away if you feel you've got a vent. I feel your pain, but that's why things are the way they are. If you don't like it, of course, we have the power of the voice still, right now at least. You could say, hey, I think these rules are draconian and they need to change. Go for it. Good luck with that. Okay, so what about those of us that want to play by the rules, be super legal, and go about it the way we're supposed to? Well, yes, there's ways that you can go get your inspection certification where you can inspect your own lumber structurally. And a lot of you guys have commented, well, I'm just going to go over here and take this class, or I can do this and it's no problem. Well, I think we need to clear up some things here. There may be some confusion as to the different types of certifications we're talking about. So let's define those two first. What we're talking about right now is structural lumber grading. This is for stressed, non-stressed construction wood. This is where the inspection is actually determining the ability, the engineering ability, the structural ability of that piece of wood to hold a load, to clear a span, to do all those type of things. It has nothing to do with well, it has something to do with cosmetic, but it's primarily for the structural integrity of the piece of lumber. That's what you're inspecting for. The second type of inspection, which most of us backyard sawmill guys are thinking more of, at least that's what I always think of, is appearance lumber grading. And what that is a process of inspecting lumber to make sure visually it is a clean piece of lumber. It has absolutely nothing to do with its structural ability. It's literally, does this have a bunch of knots in it? Does this have inclusions? Does it have checks? Whatever the case may be. It's visually, how does this board look? Is it sexy for woodworking? You could almost say that these two types of inspections are really kind of reserved for softwood and hardwood. So softwood structural, hardwood for appearance and woodworking. But that's not 100% accurate because there are hardwood species that have been graded for structural integrity. So there's actually grading systems in place for specific hardwoods. And of course, even on the appearance side, there's times that softwoods are graded for appearance because they're going to be used in they're going to be used in woodworking projects, and they need to be graded as such. So with the structural wood inspection process, it's a much more in-depth training process simply because you're learning to be able to visually inspect a piece of wood and determine its structural or strength integrity. So like if I was looking at this poplar 2x4 that I milled, that's actually really a 4/4 board with a ton of core rod, I could look at that if I was, okay, that can't be used for structural wood. It has some issues, clearly. But much more in-depth training there because you're looking at the structural integrity of that piece of wood. So with appearance lumber grading, of course, you're just looking at it visually. So looking at this poplar and say, no, this wouldn't make a nice front to a cabinet because it's got a huge core rot in the center of it. So let's not give that a first and seconds rating or grade A rating. So when I spoke to Dave at Timber Products, who one of the services they offer is training, so you can go to them as well as 5 or 6 other companies, I believe, across the country that will train you in structural wood inspection. He said that is an option, but, and I quote, I've got my notes right here, I'm going to quote David, ALSC accredited agency's primary function for lumber grading is to provide grade stamps on a subscription basis. This would likely only be an option for someone who will have a continuous and ongoing sawing and grade stamping operation to be able to justify the monthly dues. So what's Dave mean there? Well, I'll put words into his mouth, but basically he's saying, yeah, it is an option, but the upfront costs of going through the training are pretty significant. But then you have to maintain monthly dues, which those monthly dues are nothing to sneeze at, and it's variable based on a lot of things. But so there's this monthly subscription that you have to maintain to keep your inspection. And then he also mentioned in a previous conversation where those guys that have that inspection process and they're paying their dues, they then have to be subject to surprise inspections to make sure you're doing what you're supposed to. They'll show up and look at some wood that you've got laying around that you've graded and said, did you do it right or not? So if you're going to be in operation, you're going to get your mill, maybe you've got a much bigger mill than I do, and you actually want to do some commercial production from it, where you're going to be constantly sawing, maybe you're bringing logs in, you're sawing, you're producing structural lumber, you're really trying to turn a great product, you're kiln drying it, you're surfacing, you're doing all that kind of stuff, then okay, that maybe starts to make sense because that can fit into your business model. But if you're like me, just a hobby guy, milling wood off the property who, okay, yeah, maybe I'd like to build a structure to live in or an Airbnb type of thing, something like that that somebody's going to spend some time in, then getting that inspection just isn't going to make any sense. It's going to be terribly cost prohibitive. And that's why I think when I look around my area here in central West Virginia and I see these smaller commercial mills, those guys aren't doing structural lumber. They're doing all appearance grade type lumber, all hardwoods, and they're not messing with the structural. Now, it may have something to do with the fact that we're in the middle of the Appalachian forest, which is predominantly hardwood. I get it. Use what you got, right? Well, I hope I cleared some of that up. I hope, I'm sure we've queued up more questions. Several of you guys had commented about timber frame and log houses, and we're actually going to address that. I'm still talking with David and some other guys about this because there are some asterisks. They're caveats when it comes to timber frame and log cabins compared to stick built. It's kind of a whole different ballgame. So we'll address that in an upcoming video. I'm really enjoying these conversations we're having with you guys, and it appears with all the views that you guys are as well. So we'll keep these conversations going. So if you've managed to stick around with me this long, then kudos to you. But I want to share something with you, something that we use on the farm here constantly. And if you're familiar with the channel, you actually see me use them all the time. I talk about them all the time. And yes, we are paying some bills here maybe. But this is the Olight, and Olight's got a special coming up. Actually, if you're watching this video, the special starts tonight and then just runs for the next 24 hours. I'll post all the details below so you don't have to hear me talk through them. But this is one of the lights, excuse my coiffure here, that I've been waiting for. I have a bunch of other lights, but I don't have this one yet. And this is a really cool light. This is the Perun or the Perun. Depends on how you pronounce it. You can ask them. I don't think they really know how to pronounce it either. But it's really cool. These lights are just fantastic as far as their quality goes. This one is kind of a side mount light. You can see instead of the bulb being at the head, it's actually on the side. And the reason for that is you can drop it into this this harness for your head, and of course wear it as a hands-free headlamp. I haven't adjusted the strap yet because I literally just took this out of the box. So really neat. Been waiting to have this for camp, and obviously some of the work to do around in the mill here, that I can have it on my head, be hands-free, do all that type of stuff. But of course you can slide it out of the harness and use it as a regular flashlight, up to 2,500 lumens. I kid you not, I probably have 30 Olights now, and I literally use every single one of them because there's different functionalities. They've got, really broad broadcast, like floodlight. I've got one that's like 23,000 lumens. It's ridiculous. And then they've got the tight beam that goes forever. It seems like it. I don't know how far to go because I hit a mountain with it before I get to the end of the light. But really good. See the details below. If you want interested in Olight, check it out, and you can use a link, Red Tool House link below, that gives you a discount on non-sale items. So check it out. All right, appreciate everybody watching. Take care.